So hi, my name is Lindsay Pageau. I work for Cornell Cooperative Extension as an agricultural business development marketing specialist and a statewide agritourism specialist. Today's presentation is going to be on navigating neighborhood and municipality conflicts. I also own an agritourism operation in upstate New York called Adirondack View Lavender. So the topics for this presentation today is going to be learning how to protect your agritourism operation, learning to prevent conflict with neighbors and local governments, and learning to resolve issues with neighbors and municipalities. I kind of did these different topics areas all together. But the first thing that we're going to be starting is it's important to know what your property is zoned as. Is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it vacant land? That information you can find out from your local municipality office. It's usually also located in New York State, at least. It's in my county. It's right on our taxes every year. It says exactly what the property is zoned as, and any exemptions that might be on there too. It's important to know with your local municipality is based on what you're zoned for, what you can do under that. It may be different from each area of the state or within different states if you live outside of New York State. So you might need to look into changing that zoning and what that process might be for your municipality. The big thing is under that zoning of what you can do on the property is how to handle like what you want to do on the property. Do you need to ask your code enforcement officer what you're allowed to do, or do you just go at the idea of like, I'm just going to do whatever I want and just ask for forgiveness? I will tell you from my experience with working with agritourism operations across the state who have had issues that have just gone out and done whatever they've wanted to. And then when they run into issues with the code enforcement officer, it's usually doesn't work out well. So it's important to have those open conversations with your local municipality's code enforcement officer to see what you're allowed to do. That may include where are you allowed to have parking on the side of the road? Most times you can't. It needs to be in a designated area. You might have a restriction on how many parking spaces you're allowed to have, what type of signage you're allowed to have out front to mark your operation. Are you even allowed to have signage? If you're going to have like different tents and structures, say you're just going to have like a pop-up event. And you might be just looking to put up a 20 by 40. Do you need to have a permit to put up that permit on the property? Maybe you might need one because it might have sidewalls on the tent, or it might just be something that the code enforcement officer's like, go have a great event, no worries. Special permits. So like say you're going to have a big festival on your property, you may need a special permit. You may need to have a backup plan on with the fire department or your local police department. So it's really important to have those conversations with your code enforcement officer, with the municipality, to figure out what you're allowed to do and not do ahead of time. So the other thing that's really important is say you do have issues when it comes down to like your local municipality, or when I'll talk a little bit at the end of this about working with your neighbors and everything. It's important to kind of look at what you're doing as a farm operation. So ultimately, when we think about agritourism, it all starts with farming. So it's important to be under, the definition of what a farm is in your state. So I'm going to kind of hit upon the definition in the state. The definition of agritourism is different internationally, state all the way down to the local municipality. But I also like to tell people is when it comes down to agritourism, within your local municipality, it's important for you as a farmer and in agritourism operations to be able to show your your local municipality the importance of agritourism in regards to like economic impact in the community. If you're just growing the crops, you're not going to be collecting that like 7% sales tax as you might be doing on like events and value added workshops and stuff. So bringing in like that extra value added products that you might have um, from any of your things are going to bring in that revenue that you're going to be giving back to the state and the local community. You're also bringing people to your area. So there's going to be impact of additional sales within the community, and that's going to impact the other businesses in the community. People are going to need to go get food at some point, and it might be to a restaurant, might be a food truck. They might be staying over. So they also would bring in additional people to be staying in accommodations within the area. People are also going to probably do some type of shopping, even shopping all the way to just get gas at the local convenience store. And then also usually when people come to an area for agritourism events, they're usually visiting other attractions. Where I live, like they might come to my lavender farm and then they might go down the road to All Sable Chasm to go see the beautiful walking trails and the water. So when we look at a definition of a farm, so New York State, this is going to be depending on where you're located in what state. So New York State Department of Agriculture Markets definition of a farm specifically includes the land, buildings, equipment, and practices that contributes to the production, preparation, marketing of crops, livestock, and livestock products as a commercial enterprise. The primary purpose of a farm operations, marketing, events, and activities must be to sell the farm's crops, livestock, and livestock products. Further, the events and activities must be sufficient related to the farm operation, and the farm must produce enough of its own crops and livestock products to sustain the needs for the particular type of marketing tool. So understanding what that definition is really important to start off. In New York State, we have right to farm laws. So those were I think they were adopted in the 70s. So under Article 25AA is where we get the right to farm law. Provide protection against nuisance claims. It helps farmers to be able to farm. And so like if there's an issue with like a neighbor, say that you're spreading like liquid cow manure, or you have this agritourism operations, ag markets can kind of help farmers through based on a case by case. But it's really want to stress it's case by case. It's important to be doing farming based on that past definition. Another thing to consider, so something to help protect an agritourism operation, maybe being in an agricultural district. You don't have to be one. You can be outside of an agricultural district to still do agritourism. But an agricultural district protects the farms, promote the availability of land for farming purposes. So allows that farmland is protected. I pulled this up of where my property is. I can tell from this, my parents' house, and then all in the green is my farm. So if you're wondering if you are in an agricultural district, this website below actually will show you exactly where in the state of your agricultural district. Agriculture assessment. So you do not need to get agricultural assessment in order to do agritourism, but it can help with some protection so that it shows that you're farming. Like if you get agricultural assessment, you're in an agricultural district, it helps your case a little bit better. Agriculture assessment program also gives you a deduction so that you're not paying as high of a tax on that land. Their agricultural assessment program within your state, it's through New York State Taxation and Finance. You fill out paperwork and bring it to your local municipality's office, and then they assess that you're doing farming. And so I'm not going to get into this program too much, but that is a way to help with it's a little bit of protection. But it does, you know, to get agricultural assessment, there's like two options on levels. Land generally consists of 7 or more acres are considered to be preceding 2 years of productions of sales of crops, livestock, and livestock products. You have to show that you're making an average of over $10,000 or more. If you're under less than 7 acres, that's when you have to produce sales receipts of 50,000 or more over 2 years. So what is agritourism? New York State defines agritourism based on the New York State Safety and Agritourism Act as activities conducted by a farm on farm for the enjoyment and or education of the public, which primarily promotes the sales, marketing, production, harvest, or use of products in the farm and enhances the public's understanding and awareness of farming and farming life. So that's the start of what in New York State, what the definition of agritourism is. It'll be different if you're not in New York State, but the examples today that I'm using are based on New York State. So even though this is the general definition, there's a little bit more comes down to it. Under New York State Department of Agriculture Markets, so if you look under like New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets laws, it also concludes that on-farm sales special events such as harvest festivals helping market the farm operation, crops, livestock, or livestock products. So that's like example, like harvest festival. You're going to have a pumpkin festival that people are going to come for hay rides, pick pumpkins. Maybe you charge an admission fee when it comes down to it in order to go into it, and they walk out with 1 pumpkin. When there's might be any type of issues when it comes down to like an agritourism operation, those activities are going to be reflected on a case by case with the department. The thing with determining what is an agritourism operation, it's really like it gets down to this definition of events, activities must be directly related to the sales or promotion of the crops, livestock, or livestock products produced at the farm. Incidentals and subordinate to the retail sales of the farm's crops, livestock, and livestock products hosted by the farm and featured the farm's crops, livestock, and livestock products. So it's all really getting down to like the sales, marketing of that farm product. If you're hosting like a wedding, example, you have a beautiful barn and you're hosting a wedding on the farm, and somebody's paying $10,000, $20,000 to rent that space out, but they're not doing any like actual pickings, buying products from the farm, going on tours, and that's not really an agritourism event. So that's where this protection gets by that case by case with the department. So it's important to figure out ways to incorporate if you're going to say you're an agritourism operation and expect to have some type of protection under farming. An example, years ago, I was in Quebec and went to a wedding, and the weddings after event was hosted at a maple shack. And it wasn't just a maple shack. Yeah, there was that had, just an event space. It also had us, a little place that we could buy products. We went on a tour. We learned about the maple process. We had maple on snow, and tasted other different things. And there was actually maple being incorporated into, the wedding. I think it was like in desserts and stuff. So figuring out ways to incorporate it is really important. The other thing that I like to just highlight, and this is kind of not easily defined within the department, is this events and activities is where I'm getting just down to, like on the example of the wedding that I went to, is events and activities to be incidentals only when the gross annual receipts from facilities, rentals, or vendor fees, admission fees, sales of non-agricultural products. So there's a 30-70 rule. So 30% can be based on those different events and activities, those admission fees, that rental of that wedding space. 70% really needs to be related to those sales of on-site of crops, livestock, or livestock products of such. So that's where you get that. That's where you go into that fine line up for that protection. If you did 70, I like the example, if you did $70,000 a year in hot dogs and hamburgers, at your agritourism operation and did 30,000 in UPIC, then you're not like in compliance. Or $70,000 a year in rental of a wedding venue and only 30,000 when it comes down to that UPIC. So it's important to know, like, you're based on this agritourism operations really based on selling those products. However, you may do $70,000 of the rental space a year and only 30,000 in UPIC. Your whole time that you've ever operated to this point or in the future, it may never have an issue. It's just when you have that conflict with a municipality or a neighbor and it gets brought up, and that's where you're going to have, this is going to play into an effect. Because nobody's going around to every single operation seeing if they have this 70-30. But it's important to know kind of where your retail stands, where you stand with your municipality and your neighbors. And also, as it says, like in here, is farmers must keep sufficient records to provide that the requirements is met. The other thing I do want to mention too about this is when, if they ever had to have it evaluated, say that you're doing like a farm to table dinner. You're doing that farm to table dinner and you're charging $100 a plate when it comes down to it. Is that food, those vegetables, maybe it's vegetable flowers, the meat that are all being produced on your farm, is that $100 value? Or is that like an inflated value? So when it gets evaluated, would get evaluated by like the department or whoever, they would be looking at the actual value. So maybe the value is only $30 when it comes down to that actual meal on the plate. And that 70, maybe $70 isn't the same value when it comes down to it. So it's really, they're always going to evaluate what actual the retail value of the product is. The other thing I did find that I thought was interesting just to share was at least 51% of the agricultural crops, livestock, or livestock products sold of an annual basis must be from the farm's own production. So it's really important to be showing that farming, showing that it's 51% when it comes down to it. It's not discouraging you bringing, farm products from your other operations in the area and selling them on your agritourism operations or having them incorporated into farm to table. But they really want to see that land that you're on is being used for agricultural use. Let's see. So what should I do if I have issues with my municipality or code enforcement? So everybody kind of reacts differently and stuff. So I always like to tell people to stay calm. A lot of this can be resolved when it comes down to it. So it's important to research the issue. So like what I'm mentioning about knowing what your zoning is, knowing where you stand with your ag district, ag value assessment, and also your agritourism sales is really important. I feel like those are the key things you need to have in place, um, and understand. You can contact New York State Department of Ag and Markets to see what type of protection is offered under the right to farm. But it's important also to know where you stand kind of before making that phone call or sending that email. The other thing is try to find a solution with them, is just asking like, what can I do? Do I need to rezone? How can I work with the community in order to be able to still farm and still offer agritourism operations? You really want to avoid reaction responses. And I know it's hard, especially having your own farm, and it's like your baby. You want to protect it. You want to be able to still make an income out of it. But reacting is not going to help a situation. And I've run into this issue a lot over the last couple of years, of people saying, I'm going to get a lawyer. This is ridiculous. But being calm and like kind of like cautious, very respectful to the people that are in your community for municipalities, because even though those are paid positions, a lot of the time it's still even the people that sit on the review boards, those are volunteer positions. So it's better to be respectful, nice, and just find a solution when it comes down to it. And this, what I'm going to talk about, preventing issues with your neighbors. So this even gets down to back to like the municipalities. Your municipalities do not know what is happening on your farm or what you are currently doing or what you want to do in the future. So this kind of applies both ways of preventing issues with neighbors and with the municipalities, is invite them to the farm. They don't know what you're doing or planning to do. People talk, people start conversations and just assume what a lot of the farm agritourism operations are going to do. So offering a farm tour, inviting them onto the farm is a great way to just show them what you're offering. Tell them what your current plan and the future plan is. And asking them, neighbors, about any concerns when it gets down to it. So these concerns may be when it comes down to like parking or hours. It can be a lot of different things when it comes down to it. So finding out what the concerns are, and providing like open door for them to ask questions and really share those concerns even afterwards, any issues. So a lot of like, especially during COVID, an example is a lot of farm agritourism operations did go up for sales. People wanted to get out of the city, so they bought farmland. So over the last couple of years, I've seen people buy up farms. They come in, they have really, really amazing good intentions of like wanting to host more open events, concerts on it. Well, people who did that, they came into communities that, very tight communities where people like are quiet, might not like outsiders when it comes down to it. So there was a lot of concerns that got brought up and a lot of running to the local municipalities with assumptions of what was happening. So really having that open door and conversations, even if you're new into this, or planning to change some operations, is important. So I'm going to use an example. So some things that I have done in the past, like we hosted 2 weddings on my agritourism operation. So things that were like brought to my attention and things to do, and we are no longer doing weddings because I had to, I'll finish these couple and then give my main reason why I don't want to do weddings on my property. So I notified like the neighbors to let them know, especially the ones in the area that this was gonna happening. Concerns were parking, is where these people are gonna park. We have a big open field. There wasn't gonna be like 100 cars or 200 cars here. So there was tons of parking when it come down to it. I made a cutoff for music time, and also cutoff time for people to leave the property so that, you know, you didn't have people hanging around at, you know, midnight walking around or maybe wandering onto somebody else's property. So I had a policy in place with my contract is the cutoff time for the music, and that I think they had to be off the property by 9 o'clock or dark, whatever came sooner. So we had one wedding in October. So they were off the property. I don't know, I think it was by 6 o'clock. And then the other one was a June wedding, and I think it was raining out, so it wasn't the nicest weather, but they were all off the property, I think by 7. The reason why I actually decided I didn't want to do the weddings anymore is where the wedding area was above me, above my house, and my house is all on a slant. And so my house was down below, so all the music is filtering down towards my house. I have young children, and at that point, I think they were 1 and 3. And so we're in the house and the music was just so loud. It was horrible. So I was like, I'm never doing this again. Cause I didn't even personally like it for myself and my children. And so I knew my neighbors weren't gonna be really liking that in the future. So that was the determination that there was no more weddings on the property. So I'm just making sure, like, also knowing what you're comfortable with. Would you want to be having that around if you were just living in a nice, quiet area? Would you want to be having that those type of events on your property? So resolving issues with the neighbors. So like I mentioned, open conversations with your neighbors, with your municipalities, working with your municipalities. The biggest thing is you want to avoid legal. That's, you know, an added expense to the farm. So finding ways to resolve them that way. There's always mediation. I know in my area, we do have a mediator that's absolutely wonderful, who's worked with a lot of the farms in the area. And sometimes it's just really easy solutions when it comes down to maybe it's a fence that you need to be putting up between your properties. One of the phone calls I got a couple of years ago was actually not from an agritourism operation, but from a neighbor who really wanted to know, like, were they in the right or not in the right? And the issues that they were having was it was next to a hard cider operation. People would drink, people would just start wandering, and the next thing they know, they're wandering onto the neighbor's property and sitting on their picnic tables or on the front steps. So that could be a very uncomfortable situation, especially for the neighbor who might have small children. Think about adjusting your hours to make sure that it's doesn't cause an issue with your neighbor. Maybe even your season. You're shortening up your season to maybe people are coming just for specific events, or just so that it's not a continuous issue for the neighbors. Making sure that you have enough parking so people aren't parking on the side of the road, in front of people's driveways, in front of people's lawns. You just remember that your neighbors most likely want their own privacy and quietness. So figuring out ways to help with that when it comes down to it. So I am going to open this up for questions.